Welcome to the Rescue, Rebuild, Restore podcast, where we equip church leaders and compassionate Christians to serve the hurting with spirit-led wisdom. I'm your host, Suzanne Burns, author of the book, Rescue, Rebuild, Restore, Compassion That Works. Together, we're going to explore how to rescue body and soul, rebuild spirit and will, and restore lives through the Holy Spirit's power. Because every person deserves to be seen, healed, and loved. Let's dive into today's episode and discover how to live out this calling. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Rescue, Rebuild, Restore podcast. I am so excited that you're with me today. Hopefully you are listening in either on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or really pretty much anywhere that podcasts can be heard. I'm very grateful that you are listening in, and I hope that you are gaining a lot of knowledge and expertise as we talk week in and week out about how to trauma inform your ministry. Sometimes our sessions talk about addiction, about how churches can engage with the community around them, how poverty mindset affects the way in which you serve. But really and truly, it all relates back to trauma and how trauma affects the people that you seek to serve. And today, that's exactly what I want to talk about, is specifically how to trauma inform your ministry. So I thought really hard about this, and I was actually originally going to do two separate episodes, or at least maybe two separate distinctions within this episode, but one for new places starting up and then another one for existing. Then I realized that I didn't have a whole lot of direction for new organizations other than, implement the things that I'm going to tell existing organizations, implement them from the beginning, right? So really the only difference is that existing organizations are having to unlearn a lot of things or undo a lot of things in order to ensure that their ministries are trauma informed and equipped to serve the people who come their way, where new ministries have the luxury of being able to start from scratch. The downside for new ministries is that you don't have any historical knowledge to wrestle with. That's actually kind of a benefit to existing ministries, and I'll explain why. You guys know that through our Be Charity Wise program, we travel. My colleague Lisa and I travel around coaching and equipping other ministries, other maternity homes, other churches in understanding and applying, building out trauma-informed principles. We train volunteers, we train new staff and board members, all those kinds of things. And then we also have programs where we help you develop your case management systems and, just kind of all the things. I don't want to go into too much detail. That's not the point. But what I see is when we go to an existing program and we're bringing new teaching, they are surprised, but they get it because they have a frame of reference already. They have clients that they've had to ask to leave for unfortunate reasons or who have chosen to leave. They've had church members who have blown up in anger, not in any other context, but they've gotten very angry and they've had church splits or they've had big embarrassing situations happen in the fellowship hall. Because they have existing things going on and they have some prior knowledge, some prior situations, it's easier for these folks to understand the teaching on poverty mindset and trauma and addiction and how all of that affects the brain development of the people that we seek to serve. Whereas new organizations, all too often, they are because they don't have that existing historical knowledge collectively. Probably they worked in this facility or they had this in their individuals will have pieces of this, but because they don't have organizational historical knowledge, there are gaps. There's holes missing, and some of the people will not have had those kinds of stories, those kinds of interactions. They love Jesus and want to go and do great things for him. That's what I wanted to talk about today, is how do we trauma inform our ministries in a holistic way, but also in a practical way. We should not be trying to tear everything down and rebuild from scratch. You may need to do that. Any individual, any one specific place may actually need to do that. But in general, there's a lot of good that already exists. And I am not interested in throwing the baby out with the bathwater, to use the old expression. What I want to do is to cause you and your team to begin looking at the work that you do and the manner in which you do it through the lens of the average client coming in. And it's through that lens that we are going to be able to ensure that every step of the process is strong, is trauma informed, is useful to the client, which may mean that certain aspects of what you've been doing may need to be tweaked or removed or expanded. My expectation is that the bulk of what you're doing is already good. A trauma-informed ministry is really all about the lens through which you view the client informs then how you respond. That is trauma informing your ministry. The things that you do, the tasks that you do, some of those things are naturally part of that trauma-informed mindset once you're looking through the proper lens. And then granted, there are some things that groups do that are not helpful. And so those need to be laid to one side. But it's not for me to say what's helpful or what's not, because quite honestly, on any given day, those things are still useful for this one client. Maybe not for every client, but for this one client in particular. Let me give you a frame of reference so that I'm not talking too general. I know that can get confusing. Yesterday, I attended a meeting led by our local juvenile court, who they're interested in getting a mentorship program going with the local churches and chaplains and, of course, obviously the faith-based nonprofits and everything like us. We already have a great relationship with the juvenile judge. He used to be our go-to attorney for everything, and then he had the audacity to want more and to go get elected judge, and so now we can't ask him off-the-record questions anymore, but he's fantastic. Anyways, so of course we were there supporting him, but also participating. As we were getting started, we were talking with one of the other leaders in our community that also represents, they work a lot with the courts, and they represent the children through their ministry. Of course, our ministry is predominantly working with the mothers, occasionally a single father here and there, but predominantly we're working with moms, helping them avoid loss of custody or working to regain custody, as well as dealing with maybe criminal charges or, the whole 9 yards. So we deal a lot with this other organization in terms of family units. They're working with the kids in the family and we're working with the parents. So we have a great relationship with them. There's also a third ministry that this ED was talking with me about. And she said she's very concerned because the clients that they have worked with this third ministry so far have gotten custody restored and woohoo, yay, but then almost immediately lost it all over again, which is incredibly tragic and incredibly traumatizing for the children for sure, but for the parents as well. We were talking about the reasons for that and the differing philosophy between our organization, where that doesn't happen, and their organization. And it really came down to enablement. And so this other organization will, let's say they go in and the reason why the children were removed was because of a dirty house. That's very realistic. They go in and clean. And maybe they pay the rent, or maybe they're buying a car for the mom so that she has transportation for her children to make sure that they're not late for school. Maybe they lost custody because of truancy or are at risk for losing custody for truancy or tardies. All these things sound good, right? They sound like being the hands and feet of Jesus. The issue comes when you're still doing it for them, as opposed to teaching them how to do it for themselves. It goes back to that old adage about teaching a man to fish as opposed to giving them a fish, and how much more valuable it is to now have the skills yourself to be able to replicate it anytime, anywhere that you need to. And we are absolutely an organization that focuses on teaching people how to do it for themselves. And so the reality is the Rescue, Rebuild, Restore framework understands that there is a time frame they're in that rescue phase where you may need to be cleaning her house, or you may need to be helping her stay clean, stay sober. You may need to be handling all of her transportation and making sure that you're the one communicating with her doctor's offices or with the food stamp office, or whatever, because she's not ready to do it herself. But the clients should not be staying in the rescue phase indefinitely. Unless there's long-term lasting cognitive delay, unless there is a permanent reason why, which I would argue it's not necessarily permanent, it may be just delayed. But anyways, I won't go there. I won't go quite there today. Unless there is a valid permanent reason to keep them in the rescue bucket indefinitely, you should be, through case management, through goal setting, through encouragement, through mentoring, through however your program operates, you should be moving them towards the rebuild phase. Rebuild is where they are beginning to implement these things for themselves. Maybe not always perfectly, maybe not always the way you think they should, but that's, free will, right? Free will. That's their decision to make, their consequences, of course, to then live with. The analogy that I prefer is to think about raising teenagers. And granted, some people get offended by that because they're like, well, I'm dealing with, 70-year-old homeless veterans. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, cognitively, emotionally, because of the brain science that I understand and what I teach, you begin to understand that they are still effectively 15. Their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, which is their area for logic, for reasoning, understanding consequences of their actions. The whole point is getting them to begin to awaken that so that they can begin building it for themselves. Regardless of the age, you begin to recognize that they're about early teenagers. So just like a 13, 14, 15-year-old, you should be giving them more privilege, more responsibility, and testing that out, right? Giving them the room to sink or swim, the room to learn. And again, sometimes that learning comes through failure. Sometimes that learning comes through having made the wrong decision, maybe for the right reasons, but nevertheless making the wrong decision, and then now having to clean up the consequences of that. That is the initiation of the rebuild phase. Teenagers move through high school years towards high school graduation, towards, going off to college, early adulthood. All of that is a process towards independence, which is exactly how the rebuild phase should be guiding them. As you are working with your clients, whether this is a church member, whether this is what we in the nonprofit world would consider a client, or whether this is more of a loose term for a friend you have, or maybe a niece or a nephew that you're helping to mentor towards stability. It all operates the same way. So just, whenever you hear client, just kind of insert your definition of what that means for you in your circumstance. But as teenagers move through maturity and they begin to experience independence, they begin to experience responsibility, and they begin to demonstrate their ability to use their responsibility and their freedoms, their privileges wisely, their ability to use their car wisely or their credit card, or they're beginning to work and earn money and you see that they're saving, they're making good choices, right? This is the shifting into that now third phase of restoring. Our ministry tagline is rescuing mothers, rebuilding lives, restoring futures. This is the kind of that third phase where it becomes sustainable. And this usually happens around 20 to 22-ish, depending on the child, 25 maybe, depending on the child, depending on the circumstances, in a typically developing adolescent. That's when the prefrontal cortex becomes fully formed, around the age of 24. Now, most of the people that will come to us in great crisis are not going to have been typically developing adolescents. Because of the trauma they experienced at young ages, because of the abuse, because of the chronic poverty or the unstable home life or the abuse or the addiction, because of all of the adverse childhood experiences that I've gone over in recordings, because of that, they are not generally operating with a fully formed prefrontal cortex, which is why I say that they are effectively 15, regardless of their chronological age. So working with these individuals in this same pattern, rescue, rebuild, restore, is crucial. The rescue phase should be the shortest phase of all of it. And the restore is absolutely the longest because honestly, provided that they are saved, of course, but they will still be in restore mode until Jesus calls them home. I am still in restore mode to a large degree. You are probably still in restore mode. You might be in rebuild. So praise the Lord. You might have come here and you're in rescue mode, in which case shoot me an email because I would like to talk with you. Suzanne@BeCharityWise.com, and you can find that in the show notes as well. So because I would very much like to talk to you and get you connected with some local people who can help. But the focus today is on how to trauma inform your ministry. So first you have to understand what the point is, right? What is the lens through which you're supposed to be viewing them? And if you haven't picked up a copy of Rescue, Rebuild, Restore, Compassion That Works, you can get that on Amazon. You can also go to rescuerebuildrestore.com and get more information as well as the links. And that will help you understand the lens of poverty mindset, addiction, and trauma. But as we look at your actual program, let's take a look at that from start to finish through the lens of the client coming in the doors for the first time. Think of this like an undercover boss experiment, right? You may need to go physically walk through the steps and think about everything through that lens. Chances are you can't really be, don a wig and a pair of sunglasses and be that secret shopper, but maybe you can. Who knows? But really and truly, what you want to be doing is thinking about how does the average person who has never darkened your doors before, how do they perceive everything? And thinking about it from that perspective can open your eyes to a lot of things. Here's an example. My church, we have door greeters that open the doors as people are approaching the building. They're almost always men, and men in general tend to be larger than women. Now, I don't personally have an issue with that. I don't in general, but I have talked to some women in other parts of the country who have expressed specifically their intimidation when they have approached a building and it is men coming towards her. And that is definitely a thought to consider. That's definitely something to be aware of. Now, that does not necessarily mean that you're going to say, okay, only female door greeters from now on. No, we are not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. All we are doing is learning how to look through the lens of a trauma-informed ministry at our programs. Maybe what needs to happen is you have a male and a female door greeter, or maybe a male and his daughter. Sometimes we do that, and not intentionally, because it's more organic than that at my church, but it is very sweet when the young kids are the ones who are opening the door. It's very sweet, but it's also not intimidating. All those things are helpful to consider. And again, we're not making sweeping judgments or sweeping decisions, because every situation is unique. We also, for a long time, he and his wife have moved to a different church now, but for a long time we had a fella who had long hair, big scruffy beard, covered in tattoos. Most of the time he was in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt and barefoot. And he was also a door greeter. And we took great pride in that, because he is physically different than what you would assume a church is going to be like. And so if he's the door greeter, then surely that means that however you are arriving, you will fit in. You will be welcome. You will not be judged on your looks or your dress or your outer appearance, because if he can be a door greeter, surely to goodness, you can fit in too. That was kind of the understanding. And it's a good one. That's why I'm saying I'm not advocating for any particular thing, either for or against. What I am saying is, here is the lens I want you to look through. As you physically walk through each of the steps of your program, you really want to be thinking about it through the lens of that first time guest. Do the activities that they do they matter? Are they filling out paperwork that's useful, or are they filling out paperwork that just gets stuck in a file somewhere just because you need to have something on file? Are the policies trauma informed? So if you're giving out food boxes, how often can they come? How many members of their household do their other members of their household have to come with them? Because I have gotten that comment from organizations in the past. How do we know if mom and dad and all three kids don't come? How do we know that she's saying the truth when she says, oh, we're a family of 5? We need to see. Well, I mean, I can understand that, but also if she's going to lie to the church, then to me, that's just between her and Jesus. I'm not worried about that. That's her problem. That's not, if it's a family of 2 versus a family of 5, a family of 4 versus a family of 5, who really cares? That's not enough food difference to make or break my ministry, So go ahead, lie to me, who cares? Because also, what happens is those kids, are they in school? Are they supposed to be in school? Now they're having to be out of school in order to come to you. Are the kids now reminded, because they're coming to you, to this food bank, that they have food instability at home? And so they're kind of being forced to acknowledge visually that they are in a family of need. What about the dad? Assuming there is a dad, maybe he should be at work. Now, granted, there's also pros to that. You can get the family engaged. You can maybe get the husband connected with some male mentors. You can get the kids connected with the Sunday school class or the Wednesday night kids groups, all those kinds of things. There's certainly pros. I'm not saying there's not. I'm saying look through the lens of trauma-informed approach to see whether or not any given piece of your program is appropriate, is necessary, and useful, right? Useful. So once you've gathered the data from the actual client experience, and you're going to want to walk through from when you step in the program to when you exit the program, whatever that program may look like. It could be a 8-week discipleship class. It could be a faith and finance from the Chalmers Center, which is designed for low income, poverty level financial training, something that would be different from a Crown program or Dave Ramsey, something that's more geared towards people who ain't got nothing. Once you've gone through that whole process and really investigated it piece by piece through that trauma-informed lens, then you're going to want to compare that experience to what you know of the client's behaviors and habits of those clients that are in survival mode. Those who have a high trauma history. I've taught on some of this in some other sessions, but that really is thinking about, okay, where are the stressor points? Where are the places where maybe a single mom is going to feel intimidated, or a single dad is going to feel excluded? What are the pieces that are going to trigger a response? And then how do we deal with that response? If I have to say no to a client, or if I have to say that this is going to be your last visit, or we're not going to be able to continue to serve your family any longer, what is the likely response? What is the likely attitude? And how am I going to be prepared for that? Am I going to be prepared to discover in the midst of my food pantry ministry that, oh, this woman is being abused and she needs to flee? So how do I gather people in the church to help her get out of the home safely while her husband or boyfriend or whatever is maybe not there? How do I do this wisely? What behaviors, what attitudes, what responses the client is likely to have through their interaction. So Lisa that I train with, she always talks about the serve and return, right? Every conversation, every relationship is a serve and a return. Think about tennis going back and forth. You serve to begin with by offering the program, right? They return that serve by coming into the program. And then there's the back and forth during the whole process while they're here. Each serve and return prefaced by that trauma-informed awareness that you have. And then towards the end of it, that's when a lot of times clients begin to get stressed. What am I going to do when this is done? What am I going to do next? Or I've already gotten, rent from you guys to my max, and I don't have another resource behind it. What am I going to do? So when those stressor moments appear, so think about it as a timeline for the typical client coming through your program. Where are those stressor moments and what are they generally related to so that you can be prepared for that? Do you maybe have a staff person or a volunteer who maybe has a little bit more forthright personality, a little bit more no-nonsense personality, and sometimes they butt heads with certain kinds of clients? Maybe that person would be better served to be placed in a different position within the context of the program, not necessarily have to be got rid of, but just moved around so that their personality is at a less challenging point in the process so that we can reduce that potential for friction. And so then, thirdly, once you've walked through your process, start to finish, and looked at it from the client's perspective, and then you've looked at the client's typical responses at each stage of the process. Now, the third piece of this is to gather your team together, to review your results as a team, and really talk through each of those things that you've noticed. And they may have other pieces that you didn't notice. And really being able to talk about, are we accomplishing what we want to accomplish as opposed to what makes us feel good, right? It may make the ministry that I mentioned earlier, it may make them feel good to be constantly handing out gas cards or constantly, coming in and cleaning house. Okay, that mom was able to get custody restored. Woo, praise the Lord. But she does not have the skills to maintain that because you didn't teach her the skills, you simply did it for her. And enablement is never going to provide the equipping to be able to repeat it. The only way that you can ensure that they learn how to do something for themselves is through that rescue, rebuild, restore process, which is a lot slower, admittedly, but it's more sustainable on the backside because of that. We've had clients who have come to us from the housing authority and they were being evicted because of excessive bugs. I remember one that she had several garbage bags full of her personal possessions, and we wouldn't let them in the house, and we actually threw them all away and bought her a new set of, several new outfits. Because we just know we are not bringing bugs in our house. Absolutely not. No, sorry, Bob. We are not doing that. The thing is, though, if she doesn't learn how to clean, all she's going to do is finally get back into a housing authority home and start the cycle all over again. If she doesn't learn the importance of throwing trash in the trash can and then taking it out on trash day and cleaning her dishes and doing the things, she is not ever going to learn. And all we're doing is kicking the can down the road. And if that enabled her to either maintain custody of her child or to get custody restored of her child, then we're now putting that child at risk for going back into the system eventually, inevitably, because mom still doesn't know how to avoid it. All too often, good-hearted people who have fully developed prefrontal cortex don't appreciate who they're actually working with as far as a client goes. And that's why all too often that understanding of a teenager is really, really helpful. It's easy to picture a 15-year-old and to expect, to remember when you expected them to naturally know that the trash needed to be taken out or that the dishes needed to be done because they were in the sink. The teenager was walking past the sink or putting new dishes into the sink. But when you understand brain development, you recognize that that is not yet part of their brain's abilities. Not until they're in their, right there around the age of 24. In a typically developing person, that's when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed, fully formed. If you've actually raised teenagers, you know that they may look grown, but they ain't. Their understanding is not at the level of an adult yet. It will be, they will get there. It takes a learning process. And because we tend to be working with adults, it's very easy to assume that they're further along or that they're going to perceive things the way we will. That's not the case most of the time. As I'm wrapping this up, thinking through your existing ministry, your existing program step by step through the lens of the client, then thinking about the client's kind of user experience. What tends to go wrong? What stage of the process? Where do clients tend to get frustrated? Where do they tend to drop off, to give up? How can we address those issues at that point? Then thirdly, then we're going to take it all back to the team, discuss it together so that we get everybody's opinion, everybody's perspective. Then we begin to implement those changes that we recognize that need to be made, right? Again, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, not scrapping it all, either starting over or giving up. It is absolutely not that big of a deal. It is a matter of looking at the system through a trauma-informed lens. If you guys want help with implementing any of this into your own ministries, if you want to talk through what you've learned as you work through this process, if you want some recommendations, suggestions, if you want to brainstorm ways in which you can shift or strengthen different components of your ministry, visit RescueRebuildRestore.com. Shoot me an email. Let's hop on a call. I would be more than happy to help you go through everything, go through all your data that you will have accumulated through this process, that you know that you're building exactly what you need to in order to accomplish the purpose that you desire. Again, go to RescueRebuildRestore.com. I thank you for hopping on this podcast episode with me. I hope it's been productive. I hope it's been useful. If you have any questions, feel free to either drop them in the comments or reach out, because I would love to help ensure that you are able to trauma inform your ministry so that we can do good together. Y'all have a blessed day. Thank you for joining me on the Rescue, Rebuild, Restore podcast. I pray this episode has equipped you to serve with greater clarity and compassion. If you're ready to go deeper, grab a copy of Rescue, Rebuild, Restore, Compassion That Works on either Amazon or at rescuerebuildrestore.com. And while you're there, you can also join our Rescue, Rebuild, Restore Compassion Collective.